I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we'll go through the internship program. So just to introduce the internship program a little bit. So we actually got a grant through AICF in order to do this Kresge project. So it's a Kresge inquiry project, and there were 3 colleges who were involved in it. One represented a very, very early stage of research in their school, and that would be us. And then the other 2 were middle and end state, like had more developed research programs. And so we're going to be talking about the program from a place of new, like an institution that's very new to the entire research program. So let me actually hit the screen share so that you can see what I'm looking at. Let me pull, I've got a couple screens here, so I want to pull this over. Okay, so our overview, we're basically going to be talking about how the internship, the framework of the internship, and we're going to give you a background of our school and kind of where we are with this research, what the structural characteristics came out as, and then what the internship characteristics came out of, and all of the different outcomes that we had from that research. So, and then we actually, Tami, Nendick, and then me, my last name is Niswander, so the I is long, but it was pretty close. So, and then Crystal is also on here, and she participated, she was part of our group, and so we had another group member as well, who Julie, who is from a different institution. So that kind of gives you the background on the case study. There we go. So to give you some background on the college, I'm going to give you some background on Red Lake College, and so kind of how we fit into participating in this internship program. So we were chartered in 2001 by the Red Lake Band of Ojibwe Indians. And so that means that we are a relatively new TCU. And so that was when we were chartered, but that's not when the accreditation process started. Tami, Nendick, and I were both hired before we were even in candidacy for accreditation. So we were part of the original group that worked on the candidacy for accreditation. And so we actually achieved that in 2016. With the Higher Learning Commission, we became a candidate school. And then we were in candidacy. We had expected to have, well, we had our mid-visit right on schedule. And then we actually didn't have our full candidacy visit until the end of 2020. So we ended up having it during the entire pandemic while all of this was going on. We actually were originally supposed to have our full accreditation visit early in 2000. And when the pandemic happened, they said that they had to have people on site for an initial accreditation visit. And so it was pushed back until much later in the year. But we did pass, we made it through all of that, and we became fully accredited with the Higher Learning Commission in February of 2021. So very new to the process of everything. So we're the newest school right now who's HLC accredited from the TCUs. So a little bit about our internship program. We originally didn't have an internship program until ATD said we're going to sponsor all of the tribal colleges through this Project Success, and part of this program is going to offer internships. And each TCU kind of got to decide how they were going to do their own internships. And that ended up being our main source of internships for this program. Although since we are such a small school, we included other internship programs that we have. So we had some through the SEEDS program that was also an AICF funded initiative, and Tami Nendick was the PI on that particular project. So we used the interns from both of the projects for this so that we had a little bit higher end value, because it was pretty low just in general with how small everything is over here, and then TCUs in general. So and then for the work and economic opportunity in the community, we found, so the background there is, so there are some jobs available in the on the tribal, on the reservation itself. There are some jobs that are available, but the majority of the jobs that are available are more available in the surrounding communities. And the surrounding communities are between 30 and 45 minutes away. And so depending on transportation and other issues like that, you're going to be faced with some barriers there to some of the work that can happen. And so we talk a little bit about the actual environment of the work, and then what we're doing for the internships, the background of what currently exists. So our project overview. So the IRB, that's something that's interesting that I think as a new college, we had a very different process than the other two schools, because we ended up using Northwest Indian College's agreement with all of the TCUs, and it's there's an agreement between I believe AICF and then AHEC and all of the tribal colleges, that if you do not have an IRB process implemented either on your tribe or in your college, you can use this IRB process through Northwest Indian College, and they will review all of your IRB, and then they'll get a decision back to you. You still have to have permissions in place, and they'll review any of the permissions. But it was a very neat process to see, like, hey, we are still allowed to do research. And I know that that was a bigger project with these, like all of these organizations and AICF. So, and when we're just an emerging institution, it's very appreciated that these things were available like this to us so that we could participate in research when we didn't have all of the basis for research. And when we were going through the HLC process, this actually came up as a institution of higher learning, you're expected to do some amount of research. How are you going to do this? And these were the things that were in place. So for data collection, what we used is we did interviews that were structured or semi-structured. And then we also did some focus groups. So we did, where it made sense to do individual interviews, we did those. Tami Nendick did the majority of the interviewing and the focus groups. She individually interviewed all of the administrative and leadership teams, and then some of the interns themselves wanted individual interviews, and some of the supervisors for the program also wanted independent interviews. And so it was depending on their comfort level being in a group. And then we did have focus groups as well. And so the focus groups were the supervisors ended up doing a focus group, and then interns had a couple different focus groups. So, and then when we went through the process, like just analyzing the entire process, and we'll go a little bit more into it, but we used recorders, and then everything had to be transcribed, and it's a qualitative study, so everything is qualitative that comes from it. And then Atlas TI is the qualitative background, it's the software that we use for it. And then Excel as well. There was some Excel, and I think that that ends up getting used regardless in most studies. So I noticed with some of the dissertation work I'm doing, Excel seems to like drop everything in there. So, okay. And then I'm probably hogging all of the talking. So if Tami the other Tami ends up wanting to say something, she'll kind of unmute and jump in here.
Yeah, Tami, I guess the only thing that I would add to what you've said so far is that along with originally all the interns and the supervisors were going to be part of focus groups that had anywhere from 5 to 10 participants. And the interviews came up, that shift came up throughout the course of the case study because our campus is pretty small. And we have anywhere from 150 to 200 enrolled students at a time in a small community on a closed reservation. And so the community, it's your basic small town community, and we have our own community at the college within the larger community. And so some of those interviews weren't originally planned, but they came up because just being part of something so small and wanting to offer feedback and being part of it, because it is a valuable part of improving persistence and retention rates within the college. Our students and our faculty and our supervisors wanted to participate, but they felt more comfortable in a smaller setting without as many people involved. And so we did one-on-one interviews instead. And then the second piece to that was a survey that we included and was approved through the IRB process, where student interns completed a survey, a pre-survey that they did going into their internship, and then they did a post-survey that they completed at the conclusion of their internship. And that actually became a very good measure for us as an institution. And Tami will talk about that a little bit later on. It helps us, it was part of the IRB process, but it was one of those things that we want to keep doing at Red Lake Nation College. So we have continual measures of improvement and where we're at and the things, where our strengths and where our weaknesses are. That helps us serve our students and our interns better in the larger community and making sure our students are employable. But as we've all mentioned before, it also helps with HLC assessment and having that data on file. So.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the findings and how they interact. When we were looking at this, we didn't realize how quickly 20 minutes or 25 minutes can go by. So I'll try to speed it up a little bit. So some of our the characteristics of the actual internship was a collaboration with different community programs. And we house some of these community programs right in our college, and those were the easiest to work with. And so those were the ones that we leaned towards to begin with. So we have a young children's immersion school that's housed within the college. It's separate from the college, but it's actually in the same building that we're in. So it's in the college campus. And we were able to work with that program, and we were able to offer interns that we paid through from this ATD program for these interns. And it ended up actually leading to a few jobs for those actual students. So once they graduated, they were recruited through that program. So that was kind of a neat result that I don't know that we were really expecting when we started the program. But we wanted to reach out. Part of the guidelines of the program was try to get students in external positions. And so we did have several of them in the college, and we housed them there. So we went with we have a community library, or a public library that's also a college library. And so we were able to work some with that library in order to get positions placed there. And we were also able to talk to several of the different departments within the college and say, all right, well, we have these interns that could somehow be beneficial. Would you please take a look and see what it is that you want and what you can do with these interns? And so that was an interesting experience because each of the departments that took the interns initially came back to us and had different, sometimes they had different interns, sometimes they wanted to stop, sometimes they wanted to add different things. And so it was a process. And it depended on the availability of supervisors, because we had decided that interns, several of these supervisors decided that interns could be a lot of work, which if you've ever had an intern, that is sometimes they can be a lot of work. And so sometimes they weren't available to host an internship and sometimes they were. So that was very dependent on what the openings were as to who had the time to mentor these students. So there was a variety of like application requirements and training requirements. Training was something that came up in the challenges or things to improve. We ended up with all of our interns throughout the focus groups and our supervisors saying that they wanted more orientation, they wanted more training, they wanted to know how they were supposed to support these interns. Because when we first started the program, it was a little bit more freeform than maybe it ended up towards the end. And so we ended up having to implement some of these orientations and trainings due to the need that happened. So
and those trainings were for interns, which we can also do through our learning management software that all of our students have access to. So we can make modules that are put in there and do trainings and orientations that way, where they're guided through their LMS on campus. We can also do them in person. But just to add on to what Tami was saying, some of those trainings were also for supervisors. One of the things that came out of our data analysis was that some of our site supervisors on campus weren't really aware of their responsibilities or their duties as a supervisor going into their first internship or having their first student intern. The level of communication, the level of organization. And if you have an intern that isn't showing up for work on time, or you have an intern that isn't meeting those responsibilities, how do you go about handling, not conflict, but how do you manage? How do you, initiating and practicing some of those supervisory duties was something that was new to a lot of our site supervisors. And so that was something that came out of it too, is that the orientation and the training would be useful, not just for our student interns, but for our staff in supervisory roles as well.
Several of the intern supervisors had never actually supervised anyone before. So some of them were in roles that were more clerical, or they may have been like a high skill profession, but they had not had that experience. And so they basically needed how am I supposed to supervise people? And when we promote somebody internally to a supervisor position, we support them and we give them those sort of opportunities to learn how they're supposed to manage other people. And then we didn't even think to do that with the, and so that came in as a like, hey, I don't know how to supervise. And some of the supervisors, we ended up changing them into a more support role rather than a supervisory role. So, so that was actually kind of fun to learn because it's the same sort of skill set that you need to manage a department or other staff that you need for your interns to provide them that type of support. So, and so that kind of goes into the role and behavior of the site supervisors. We actually had really good luck in hours with the offsite, not the offsite, the off that weren't part of the college, that were part of other organizations. And because they had the structure to hire people. And so when we offered an intern, they were excited, but they also had kind of their structure. So they plugged them into a more employee type work than some of the departments, which plugged them into a more student experience. All of our internships were all paid internships. We didn't have any unpaid internships. And we also, originally, we didn't offer credit. And I'm actually going to let Tami Nendick talk a little bit about the credit that was offered on a very, very limited amount of internships and what the decision process, because that has quite a process to go through when you decide to offer credit for an internship. And so it was a very small amount of interns that we did. So if you could just talk about that like really briefly on those seeds interns.
Sure. Our only interns that received credit for their internship hours were through the SEEDS grant that AICF offers. It's an environmental stewardship grant that is a collaboration between traditional values, that traditional ecological knowledge, and putting it into practice within the community. And so those interns did research projects with our Department of Natural Resources, and they did community action projects with the reservation and tribal council and our K-12 school district. And so they gathered that information and did the research, but those were the only two, and that was part of the SEEDS grant through the college fund.
Okay, thank you. Great, we have about 5 minutes. I saw the thing come up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the internship sites too. And so ours were more departments than they were like independent sites for the most part, the student ones anyways that were within the college. And so the different departments within the college tried to actually create these internships that were of an interest to the students. And so part of implementing this is we didn't want to offer an intern, we didn't want to offer an internship that was outside of what the student was interested in. And we didn't want to place a student in something that they might not be interested in. And so like one of the examples that we have is, so there were a couple that were placed in the business office. And one of the interns there absolutely loved it, decided that this was her career path. And then we had another intern that also went into the same structure, and that person took a look at what was required, what had to happen, and decided that this was not for them. And this was a horrible fit. And although the like perception of what they thought they would be doing seemed like a great idea. And so as far as we were looking at those, we thought those were both extremely successful, because you have one person that saw like, yes, this is something that I'd want to do. Then we have another person who didn't waste their time getting a degree that they definitely wouldn't want to do as their job in the future, so that they could shift early. So we do just offer the AA at our program. And so when they're specializing, that's when they've gone on to usually the neighboring town to get their other degree. And so they actually shifted what their expectations were a little bit based on the internship, because they actually didn't like the work, and others really did. And so figuring out whether or not something was successful was interesting too, because you do have yes, you worked this amount of hours, you completed this internship, and all of those are great success measures. But also, I learned I don't like to do this, and I'm going to try something else instead. Also, is a very good success measure, because you have these students now who know more about themselves, and they've got a broader expectation of what it is they really want to do. So
And I think one of the things that's important to note about the internships, we just started them through the Achieving the Dream program, like Tami had said. And so our scheduling of students really changed. Originally, they were supposed to work 20 hours a week for 16 weeks during the semester. And with first generation college students, living in the economical conditions that they live in, that just wasn't always possible, especially with the family obligations that our students have. And so we had to have some flexibility with the scheduling, and students ended up in some placements. There were a handful that they didn't really care for the work, but the strong part or the strength of the internship program was the mentorship and the sense of belonging and identity that came working with staff and faculty on site. And we did see a notable increase in retention and persistence between students who were interns and those who were not. So even if they were in the business office and didn't much care for the work of the business office, they still formed a relationship with the faculty and staff, with their supervisors, and their support resources within that department. And so they became more successful as a student. They had that familiarity and a level of comfort that students who weren't interns just didn't have that. And so that was probably the biggest strength of our internship program. Danae would probably, Danae may say differently. Danae has had internships for years at their college, and they have quite the structure and the process worked out. And it's something to look, it's a goal for us to be able to work toward that.
I believe that we're out of time. Between the two of us, we probably could take another 3 hours and tell you more about internships. But are there any questions? Since I was screen sharing, I couldn't see any of the questions that may have came up in the chat box.